Well, thanks everyone for joining us this evening. Really, I think this is going to be a really fun hour or so. I just wanted to mention briefly how we connected with Damon. So I was reading Tape Op magazine. I think it was the November, December issue, and reading this article about a really cool studio in a church. And as I read it, I found out, wow, that studio is actually located here in Atlanta. And I thought, wow, what a neat thing to learn about, and it just seemed like a great opportunity to bring that to everyone here in this program. So let's kick it off. We've got Damon Moon, who is the owner of Standard Electric Recorders Studio in Scottsville, in Atlanta. So Damon, welcome. Thanks for joining us. You'll see that he is actually sitting in his studio. The way we're going to do this, we're going to spend probably 25 minutes talking about him, his new studio, and his design and putting it together. And then he has actually prepared a video to show us. It's about 25 minutes long, a video tour of his studio, which will include a special performance by one of his clients, which he will tell us about. And then after that, we'll have a short Q&A. So as you hear, if I can't get to all the questions, something you want to raise with Damon, write it down, and we will have a Q&A at the end, and we can keep going as long as people have questions. So, all right, Damon, welcome. Why don't you just give us a basic background on your background in music and how you got into recording?
Sure. Yeah. Thank you guys for having me. Yeah. As far as my background in music, going back to being really young, I played clarinet in like fifth grade. That was like my dad played clarinet growing up, and so he kind of pushed me into doing that. But my parents weren't really into music very much growing up. I didn't like really grow up with a lot of music playing around the house ever. The little bit that I did hear was like just kind of whatever country music was happening in the early 90s, and I wasn't really into it. But I think I was in fourth or fifth grade, and I'd been playing clarinet, and a good friend of mine, we were like on the playground, and literally came up to me. He stole his sister's like Walkman cassette thing with some headphones, and he's like, "You just have to hear this. Like, listen to this." And so he hit play, and it was Zeppelin 3. And I think the song was like Tangerine or something. But yeah, I mean, I was kind of like floored right then. I had heard, of course, I knew what a guitar was and what drums were and everything, but just like the sounds on that record, I was like, why does a guitar sound like this? Why do the drums sound like this? I became like amazed at and just really intrigued by just the way that everything sounded. So that's all I could talk about was just like to my parents. I was just like, listen to these drums, listen to this guitar, listen to, this flute sound or whatever. And so that year for my birthday, my dad was like, we'll get you a guitar or a 4-track. And so it was, for me, it was like hands down a 4-track. So my very first experiences were in like, at this point is probably sixth grade. It was just like overdubbing myself playing clarinet on a little Tascam Studio, and just trying to, make sense of that and panning stuff around and just, kind of like just nerding out about just the really simple aspects of recording. So for me, it was all about recording from day one, like the music part of it. Like, of course, Zeppelin was awesome, but it was always kind of secondary to just the way that things sounded. So not too long after that, I got interested in guitar, and so picked up a guitar at a pawn shop and started playing, and had a bunch of punk bands growing up. And it was always like, those things were always kind of like a vessel to be able to record and to experiment with, how like at that point I had like one SM57 and the Porta Studio, and that was it. So it's like, how can I make this sound cool, So it was kind of always about that. And then, played in bands up until a couple years ago, quite frequently. And then spent a lot of years touring on the road with some bands, and eventually just moved to Atlanta and decided that this was going to be the year I quit my day job to record. And I had, at that point, I think I had 3 SM57s and 2 mic stands. And, I never looked back, and just had some really cool roommates that let me, you know, take that on, and just every penny I made, I just put it back into it. And that was 10 years ago now. So,
So as I recall, Standard Electric Recorders
mhm.
was formed around 2017, and this new studio is the second facility, right? That you've had this studio in. Is that right?
Yeah, yep. Yeah. It was originally, um, it was just an idea. So I was previous to that studio, I was in my second kind of studio. The first spot that I was in was really just my bedroom, and my roommates were cool enough to, let me pursue doing that full time. And then 6 months in, everyone was hung over on a Saturday, and I'm trying to get a snare sound in the living room. So that didn't last long. So I moved into another studio that was called The Cottage over in East Atlanta, and was with a partner there. And we were there for a couple of years, and then eventually that became two other partners. And so when we left there, my former partner now, he and I went in on a house together in Atlanta and built that out. And that was the first Standard Electric Recorders. It was over on Memorial Drive. So I was there for about 4 years. And then, COVID hit, and it was like, I mean, the whole industry, I think, is been like completely morphed from it, as every industry has been. But it became obvious really quick that I wasn't going to be able to keep making records in this tiny little house. The whole place was like, I think like 1,200 square feet for the entire house, and that had a kitchen and an office that I didn't even use for tracking. So it was pretty small, you know.
So where did the name Standard Electric Recorders come from? I love the name. I think it's just fantastic. Where did it come from?
Thanks. Yeah, I'm like really inspired by stuff from the 50s and 60s in the audio world, and so I wanted like a name like, Western Electric, or just these big bold, kind of names from back then. Western Electric, or just like United, or just whatever. So Standard Electric just kind of came up, and recorders was always kind of the thing that we wanted to make a really conscious decision to like name the studio after the people that are doing the work, and not just like call it Standard Electric Studio or something. I think and it's just me, but like in the kind of studio world, a lot of times I feel like studios market themselves kind of funny, and we market ourselves like doctor's offices, but like we're oftentimes like talking about how like we don't want things to be sterile, or we want to keep things natural, and yada yada. So like I wanted to make it about the people, and I thought that was like the first step at keeping things like really human and personable. Is like if we can start with the brand and keep the brand that way, and actually spend time like marketing, in a way that's not just like, here's this big studio and you're gonna sound your best in this room. It's like, well, why? It's like, you're gonna sound your best because you're the most comfortable in this room. So it's always kind of been about that.
Cool. So, okay. So 2000, end of 2019, you were in your other facility. Here it is, March of 2021. You've now got a studio in a really cool location in a church, and your book is absolutely full from what we hear, that you are booked entirely through August, I believe you said, or maybe even longer now.
Yeah.
So wow, what a dramatic change. Why don't you tell us about how you got to the facility, and the story behind, how this new Standard Electric recorders came to be?
Sure. Yeah, I guess once COVID hit, I kind of felt like there was an expiration date on my old location anyway. I'd been there for 4 years, and like I pretty much immediately outgrew the space just because it was so small. And as you can see, like I like to have stuff sitting around. So that collection just grew exponentially once I had a place that place was twice the size of the previous place. So yeah, once COVID hit, I was like, there's no way this is going to be safe. So I started looking around, and it was kind of just happenstance that, I partnered up with a good friend of mine, Will Durr, he's the other half of the studio here, and he and I started looking around and talking to our buddy Andrew next door, who he runs like a repair shop. Andrew used to work at Paste, but now he still does. But he has an electronics repair and drum restoration shop that's attached here called Sustain. And then my girlfriend Sydney also runs a children's music program called Little Troublemakers. So the four of us kind of thought, like, if we can just find a big enough place, like a compound for all of our businesses to kind of coexist and not kind of like interfere too much with each other's operations, we just thought that it would be, the most ideal thing. So we started looking around, and we were actually looking at a spot downtown. We toured that spot a few times, but it was just like an undeveloped basement, and it pretty quickly just like fell apart, the deal for that. And so I was actually on like LoopNet and just randomly was like trying to zoom in to like the East Atlanta area, and the map just freaked out and it actually just zoomed into Scottsdale instead. And this was just the first listing. And I was like, oh, this looks interesting. And so we contacted an agent and came to come tour it. And it's actually, you can't see it from here, but there's a booth in the back of the control room here, and it's right by the front door. And we walked in, and there's already this piece of glass in the wall. So it was just kind of immediately, it was like, oh my God, this is a booth. The room is actually the original crying room. So if you had babies that were crying in service, you would take them back there and you could still watch the service. So it was kind of immediately just spoke to us, and it's huge. It's like, I think the whole place is around 4,000 square feet. The studio side is probably, trying to think, maybe about 2,000 or 2,200 square feet total. So yeah, I mean, it was a long process, and it was totally kind of like out of our wheelhouse, and the first time that any of us had, done things like commercial real estate. So it was a big learning experience, and still is, but somehow it worked out, and we're here, and it's awesome.
So you walk into this place and it looks great. You've got the altar set up. How did you go from that to having a kind of built out studio, and any lessons learned that you could pass along?
Totally. Yeah. So I guess like the first thing, just being like with the commercial aspect and everything, we had to hire an architect to like draft up plans. So we worked with an architect, and had to go through the whole motions of doing that. But we ended up working with Wood and Wireworks, which they're here in Atlanta. They pretty much exclusively build studios, I believe, and like practice spaces and whatnot. But Forrest, actually, I met him, the owner of that company. I met him at another audio event, and we just stayed in touch. And I was like, I think I know a guy that builds studios. So we just contacted him, and that kind of just fell into alignment as well. And that whole process was honestly a lot easier than it could have been, I think. All the other studios in the past, it's like I'm hanging the drywall and I'm framing it, and I don't really know what I'm doing, but it's all just a means to like, can I just put a guitar amp in here and have it not, spill into everything else?
So we're going to get to your video here shortly, but what were some of the challenges from an acoustics perspective, and taking a place like that and turning it into a studio?
Yeah, I mean, that was a learning experience in itself, and still is. The room is huge, especially before we built the walls, like, which was really intriguing at first. Like, you'd walk in and clap your hands, and there was like a 4-second tail, So this is my first like big studio. All the other studios have been really small, so I was really excited and intrigued by having a bigger room. And everyone that I know that has a bigger room was like, well, like, it's going to be really nice for your workflow, but you're not going to really benefit too much from the sound, not as much as you think. And which is totally true. I have all these huge gobos that we roll around to just try to isolate everything, just because that's kind of how I like to record a lot of stuff pretty dead, but with some kind of like funky room mics and whatnot. So yeah, I don't know. As far as treatment goes, I just haven't thought about it too much. Like the place is really just like the vessel for everything that happens inside of it. So, um, I don't have, there's no diffusers out there or anything. I'm just putting gobos up and kind of letting things go and having challenges and working with that.
So what's the nature of your clientele and how's it going? I mean, you've been there, what, almost a year, I guess, at this point?
I guess, yeah, we signed the lease in August and opened in October. So yeah, I guess that's coming up
Little,
quicker than I think. Yeah, I mean, I work with a ton of different artists, a lot of different genres. I guess like indie rock is kind of my bread and butter. That's what I probably gravitate to the most. But I mean, I just did like a family band style record that, like really bluegrass and southern, and that was a lot of fun. But a lot of indie rock, and yeah, I mean, it's just staying busy. I mean, I've stayed pretty busy over the years, but this has been pretty exceptional lately. It's yeah, gotten intense. People are fighting over days. So
you have quite a wall of hardware there behind you.
Mhm.
What have you found are some of the advantages, disadvantages of having so much hardware, and how's it working in this kind of entirely new space?
Yeah. The disadvantages were just moving it here. That was the hardest part. But I mean, I'm really big on hardware, and everything is just a tool. And I use, I'm not like an analog purist in the sense that I refuse to use VSTs or anything. I have plenty of VSTs that I use, but I'm also just like, I don't know. For me, it's all about the process and keeping the process inspired for the artist, but also for me. I think like the same way that a guitar player, goes into a guitar store and you pick up a guitar that doesn't look like it's going to be anything for you, and you play it, and then you go and you see something that looks like something that you would really like, and you pick that up. That's going to affect the way that you play. That's the way I feel about preamps and compression and microphones. Like I try to keep it inspired for me and just as much as the artist. And I think I'm also really big on getting the artist involved in that stuff and trying to educate in a way that where they just become interested in some things that maybe they that aren't necessarily something that they're going to get reading forums or whatever. So
Well, if you had to pick, say, a couple pieces of hardware for those of us who are interested in kind of the hybrid studio, if you only could have a few, what would you select and why?
cool. I guess right now I would probably say I have some vintage Altec preamps that are just solid state pre's. I had one of those, the Altec, what is it, the 1566, I think, the tube version, but the Altec 1592B, which is just a mic mixer, but I just use one channel and it has a master out, so you can drive it or keep it clean or whatever. I mean, clean is pretty stretching that term for that preamp, but it's super colorful and just I feel like you can really like just do a lot with it. Like I'm constantly amazed at like you like how dirty an acoustic can sound versus how dirty a different acoustic can sound. I feel like every instrument just like has a completely different voice whenever I run through that. Also, I have this RCA BA72A pre. It came from one of the broadcast consoles, and it's been like racked, and a power supply was built by Grunning Audio Works, I think is what it is, the guy in New York. That thing is pretty incredible. As far as compression, I love compression. I think like pretty much there's three big racks here, and two of them are pretty much all compression. But I have this Maxon, like Department of Commerce tube limiter right here, the big knob. That thing is really vibey, and it just like, it has like built-in bandpass functionality. Like it pretty much rolls off everything below 400 and above 4K. I feel like just pretty gently. And it just sounds awesome. It just sounds distorted and it just blows everything up. So that's something that I love. Of course, like the DBX 165, I love. Um, I have this really cheap dual limiter that I got for like $30 at Music Go Round. That's the Symmetrix 501, and I like blow like I have in the video. I'll show you like an RCA mic that I use on drums in kind of an interesting position, but I limit it twice with that thing, and just kind of time the release to the tempo of the song. And I try to do that at least. It doesn't work all the time, but that thing sounds pretty mean as well. I have stuff that does clean stuff. I have some SSL pre's and BAE stuff and whatnot, but like I like blowing stuff up.
Well,
Like,
before we get to the video, why don't you tell us a little bit about your board there? There's a little bit of interesting story that you told us when we visited.
yeah, so this is a Tascam M600 and it's serial number 1. Let's see if I can turn the thing a little bit. So it's the first one I ever made, and I went up to Canada to get it. I didn't even know that it was serial number 1 until I got it back down here. But yeah, I don't know too, like the original owner was this guy's dad that I bought it from, and the dad had ordered the console from Tascam back in whatever year it was. And it was delivered. He started a studio business and a pizza business, and the studio business didn't do so good. And so his wife made him sell the studio, but he kept the console, gave it to the kids, and the kids made a bunch of records on it growing up. And I don't know, he said that there was stories that his dad would tell about one of the Yes records, that there were some overdubs done on this console from one of the Yes records. And I don't know, I can't find anything, about that anywhere, or any real photos of it being used like that then, but it's pretty cool to think,
Awesome.
So yeah, it sounds great though. I talk about it a little bit more in the video and all the ins and outs, but it's great. It's really modular. There's inserts all over the place, so it's really good for me to with my workflow and everything.
Well, I'm sure everyone's dying to see your place there. So why don't you go ahead and kick your video off? And I should note that Damon has spent a ton of time preparing this for everyone to get a great glimpse of his facility. So.
Hey there, I'm Damon Moon, and this is the new location of my studio, Standard Electric Recorders. I want to say thank you to AES for inviting me to be a part of this Zoom series. So before we go inside, a little bit more about the building. Last year, I was looking around for a new spot to build out my studio, and I stumbled across this building. If you can't tell, this used to be an old church. The original part of the building was built in 1908. I can't think of a more romantic idea than to have a studio in a church. So it's a long story, but it ended up working out, and here we are. We took possession back in August of last year, and we hired Wood and Wireworks to do our build out. They're fantastic contractors based here in Atlanta that specialize in acoustic design and studio build outs. It was a perfect fit, couldn't be happier. So shout out to Forrest. Let's go take a look. Okay, we're here in the control room. So the entire studio is built inside of what used to be the sanctuary of the church. Part of our build-out process was to figure out how to divvy out the space. So next to the control room here, there's a sound lock that I also use as a booth, and then that goes out into the live room, which is about 1,100 square feet. So as far as my workflow goes and kind of how I do things around here, definitely the backbone of the whole studio is my console. It's a Tascam M600, and it's serial number 1. It's the first one I ever made. I went all the way to Canada to pick it up a couple years ago, and I had no idea that it was serial number 1 until I got it all the way back to town in a storage unit, and between sessions I was plugging things in, running some signal through it, just trying to get the hang of how the board works, and I discovered the serial numbers. So I called Tascam, and they were able to confirm this, first one I ever made, so it's kind of a cool little fact. The console itself is 32 line ins, but 8 of those can be switched between stereo and mono. There's 24 mic pre's, and it's 16 buses. So I have the buses normal to Pro Tools, and I can patch more into Pro Tools if I need to. And the whole thing is just really like kind of modular and works really well for me. There's insert points all over the place on the channels and on the buses. So I use a lot of outboard whenever I'm tracking. and I sum a lot. So it just works really well for me. There's a lot of pieces of gear that I have that I've just had a long time, and I've just learned how to get the right thing out of them. So this is the control room. Let me show you the live room. Let's go. Okay, so here's the live room. As I mentioned, it's about 1,100 square feet, and this is kind of where everything happens. Whenever I was looking around for a new space, I really wanted to make sure that I could have a big live room. I've had a couple different studios over the years, and the live rooms have always been kind of pretty small. And having a big room is something I've always dreamed about, and so finally got it. I really love recording bands live and wanted to make sure that I could fit a bunch of people in here, and especially, trying to open a new studio during the middle of a global pandemic. Having a big live room was kind of key for just safety reasons. So this is mainly where I track drums over here. Every now and then I'll track drums in the sound lock, which we just walked through. I just built this drumbrella that is literally just a cheap $30 patio umbrella from Amazon that I cut the stem off of and shoved a bunch of rock wool up there and glued it in, covered it, and hung it from this pulley system. Like I said, this is my first like big room that I've had, and immediately I noticed that just my overheads were just super roomy, and that's something that I really enjoy that I didn't know that I enjoyed about small rooms so much, was being able to get really tight overheads, because I always had a cloud hanging above and whatever. So a room this big, I have to have something above. So with this pulley system, you can kind of adjust how dead the drums get, and sometimes depending on how low you get it, it can almost like start to affect the tuning of the drums. It's really subtle when you're sitting behind the drums, but if I'm in the control room and I have my assistant kind of lowering it down, I'll just give him a thumbs up or thumbs down to keep going up or down to find the sweet spot where the drums really sing. So really have been enjoying tracking drums in here in this kind of room. We also have a 1941 Baldwin Baby Grand. I really lucked out, and some clients of mine kind of gifted the piano to the studio kind of on a permanent loan basis. Their grandfather left it to them, and so now it's here and it sounds wonderful. So yeah, this is the live room, and now I think it'd be fun to show you guys some drum recording techniques that I use to keep things kind of fun and interesting. Cool. Okay, so I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the microphones that I like to use and how I process them on the way into Pro Tools, and then I am going to take you into Pro Tools and show you some stuff I've done inside the box. But first, I'm going to tell you a little bit about these drums. So connected to the studio is a repair shop called Sustain that my good buddy Andrew runs. So Andrew does electronics repair, he does instrument setups, and he restores old drums. So these have gotten the Sustain treatment. The kick drum and the rack tom are mid-50s WFLs, and then the floor tom is a mid-70s blue and olive badge Ludwig. So he actually recut the bearing edge on the Ludwig to match kind of how they were doing the edges on these WFLs. These things really sing. It's my favorite kit in the whole studio. So for microphones, I like to start off with what I think to be a pretty standard setup you might see in a big room. On kick drum, I'll do 2 or 3 channels. I'm not really partial to one mic over another. There's a lot of different kick drum mics out there. Right now I have this old, it's an Omnicraft D12 clone, and I think that sounds really great on this drum. So typically I'll throw that in the port. And then I have this 50s, it's a little speaker that came out of a 1950s K guitar amplifier that I replaced the speaker in. So I put it on a mic stand and wired it in reverse to a DI. So it's really just acting as a sub kick. It just picks up a ton of thud, and we actually have one of the Yamahas here, and I kind of like this thing most of the time more. So for snare, it's usually a 7B on top and a 57 on the bottom. That's just kind of the thing that works for me most of the time. On toms, it's always 421s. That's the thing I can't get away from. I've tried a lot of different tom mics, some EVs that are sitting around, and even 7Bs on toms, but I love the 421s. They're just hefty and they work for me. Okay, so for overheads, that's something that I'll change up quite a bit. I'm either doing stereo or mono, or a combination of both. On the track that I'm going to show you, I believe I just did some stereo overheads, which are probably these. These are just a pair of golden age ribbon mics that are super affordable, and I feel like they bat way above their pay grade. They sound really great. So now I want to talk about some of the more interesting channels that I like to use to keep things fresh. I love the worst mic, the worst position. Right now on this kit, I have an EV636, which is an Omni dynamic mic. I love Omni dynamic mics in the worst position. I think Omni dynamics are kind of a weird thing to fall in love with, but I seem to have like 50 of these mics hanging out. And so I have a lot of fun switching them out and trying different mics in that position. Another favorite of mine in the worst position is just the old classic Shure 55. This thing sounds awesome. Also, the EV635A is another one that I like a lot. So beyond the worst, another kind of weirdo mic or weirdo position maybe that I like to use is, I call it a low kit mic. And right now I have this ribbon mic. This is a 1936 RCA MI4010A. So that is the prototype for the 74B, the Junior Velocity that RCA made. I've seen this done a couple different ways. What I do with this mic, I have kind of a specific chain that I'll get into once I get into the control room. But I'll kind of game this mic up. It's kind of aimed up at the bottom of the crash cymbal if the drummer is using a crash, and at the bottom of the hi-hats, it's picking up a lot of bottom snare. So what I like to do with this mic is I game the mic up and I send it through. It's always this really cheap little dual limiter that I have, and I just smash the crap out of it. So you kind of time the release of the compression to the tempo of the song. So there's this constant pumping effect that can be really cool when you start to blend it in with overheads. It's something that I do all the time. It's really hard to get it right. Sometimes it just doesn't work and I end up trashing it. I believe on the session I'm going to show you, I actually didn't end up using it, so I probably won't play that for you. But when it does work, it's something that I feel like really gives a lot of character to the drum sound. So for room mics, I'll do a lot of different stuff. I will throw a mono room up, or a pair of fatheads in Blumline, or some SM81s kind of pointed opposite directions or something. It kind of changes a lot. One room mic that I really love to use, a different technique. Sometimes if this isn't in the worst position, this is the EV635A Dynamic Omni. If I'm not using it there, a lot of times I will just go as far away as I can from the drums, and I'll literally just point this thing at the floor on a mic stand really close. You know, like right here, like an inch or a half inch off the floor. I have kind of a specific idea that I go for with this mic whenever I'm doing that, and I'll show you how I process that. I do think I did that on the session that I'm going to show you, so that'll be pretty fun to check out. So let's head back to the control room and I'm going to play you some drums. Okay, so I've got the Pro Tools session up. Tomorrow I'm going to be working with an artist called Bathe Alone. Her name is Bailey. She's a super talented multi-instrumentalist and a fantastic songwriter. Been working with her for a long time. So we'll be cutting vocals on this tomorrow. This is a new song of hers for her new record. But I've already got the instrumental pretty much mixed, so I thought it would be fun to show you these drums because they're a lot of the same techniques that I used out there. So let's jump in. Okay, so I've got this session here for Missionary Ridge opened up, which is the song we're going to be tracking vocals on with Bailey. So I've got the drums here. I've got just the drums. All the other music down here is inactive for now. I'm going to go through and show you the kind of the major food groups and how everything was processed, and then I'm going to get into some more specific stuff with this floor mic and kind of hopefully show you a cool idea that you can try out. So this song is in 3, and it has like a really consistent kind of drum machine feel that pretty much doesn't change the whole song. It drops out, comes back in, drops out, and then at the end it kind of gets a little bit more crashy and a little bit more rocked out. So I'm just going to play you a bit of this front part. Alright, so as you can hear, it's just kind of going, doing the same thing. So for kick drum, we'll just jump in. I ended up with 3 mics here. Looks like it's a D12 through a 1272 and a 1176.
and then a sub kick that's just kind of straight through the board, and then this Roswellite, it's a Shure Roswellite ribbon mic through the SSL VHD and a 560A for compression. And so I should note too that I have made all these key spikes. If you're unfamiliar with those, there's a lot of great video tutorials out there about these, but it's a really great way to make kind of these trigger tracks for your gates for your close mic, so you don't have to depend on the audio to do the gating, or to trigger the gating rather. You can just have this MIDI information that plays a little bleep or bloop and kind of controls your gates, and so it can be way more consistent that way, a little bit easier to deal with. So I have done that for my close mics. Here's a kick drum. So you can see here I have brought back up some of the bleed on the Roswellite ribbon mic, just to not have everything cut completely off. Snare drum. Looks like I ended up with the 7B and a 57, which is pretty normal for me. 1272 and the DBX 165. This is 57 going through the CAPI BP25 preamp and 560A. I have the spike that I'm using for the gate. I've got a lot of little radiator on the bottom snare. I really love a blown out bottom snare. A lot of times I'll put a 57 on it and send it through an old Shure microphone mixer, which is just totally blown out, and your transients just look, every kick drum hit is just as big as the snare hit, which isn't ideal. But when you do these key spikes, as long as you have a pretty clean transient on your top snare, you're good to go. So I didn't do that on this session, but it looks like whenever I got to the mix, I kind of wanted that kind of thing on the bottom snare, so went back to the little radiator. And on the snare, I'm just doing a little bit of EQ, just a little bit of compression. I've got the old black box and a little transient shaper on the low end here. This is like a Slate plugin, but it's this multi-band processor that's kind of crazy. Transient shaper on that thing is awesome. On floor tom just rarely ever hit on the whole tune. Just kind of a big, thuddy 16-inch floor tom. Just a 421 and then a TL audio tube pre-compressor. Same thing, just got a spike, and really not doing anything except some compression. I didn't even EQ. Just a little compression there. And then in my kit folder here, I've got a mono overhead that was the C12 clone through an Altec solid state preamp, and then a Drummer 1978, which is a really cool little stereo compressor that I really like on stereo overheads. Just some EQ. Looks like there was something weird up here at 21. Oops, Pro Tools crapping out on me. Okay. So we'll cut to the, oh, that's why. So the worst mic, ended up using the Shure 55A through an API clone, and then lightly hitting it with an Altec limiter. Just doing some more weird EQ with this guy. I thought that was kind of cool, that boxiness. Just trying to take out a little bit of the boxiness of the kicks, but enjoying this, that kind of weird splattiness. The room mics, I had Fatheads and Blumline, and the compression on these was this old stereo Orban like broadcast limiter. So you can see the waveforms are really small. I've clip gained the room mics down for most of the song. They only really ever reach full volume here at the very end whenever things get a little bit more rocked out, but I'll just let you hear. I believe that those were, the room mics were up on the stage and kind of pointed away from the drums and drum line. Like I said, they get loud here. So that's all of that. I have the floor mic here that I used was a 635A, and I'm hitting the distressor. And in the mix, this is kind of everything again. Okay, yeah, so I have some reverb. I'm going to mute that. Here it is without the verb. Okay, so with this floor mic, I'm going to go ahead and bypass this processing. It doesn't sound like a whole lot whenever it's by itself. It's just kind of blown out. Nothing to write home about, but with these two really simple things here. This EQ, I'm like boosting a lot of the stuff that I would typically would not want to be emphasizing. Okay, yeah. So then with the gate, I've come back in and we're gating this to that snare spike so that it's just going to open up on the snare hits, and I've brought the range up to let some of the bleed back in and kind of tried to just have this be like this little splatty thing that comes up. Sounds really unnatural when it's by itself, but if I take it out and then we start to blend it in with the kit, let's see. It's kind of cool in the context of the tune and how that fits in. So then it looks like I sent that out and printed an AKG BX10 spring reverb coming back in, just a stereo spring. So with that, let's hear how that sounds. Oh, I love that spring. Sounds lovely. And then, so yeah, again, here's the whole thing. So yeah, here at the end, this section is kind of just the same as what we've heard. At the end, it's basically the same, but it's just more crashy. Yeah. So again, just the idea is, for me, I like using some of these kind of weird mics, and you know, just trying to find something usable in something that maybe at first doesn't feel that way. None of those mics that I have mentioned are remarkably nice mics or anything. It's just kind of setting stuff up and having fun with it. I also really think that you know, when we did this session, I think I was feeding that floor mic back into Bailey's headphones, and so not that that sounded good in the headphones or anything, but when you can kind of keep the process a little bit inspired, then I think that that affects the way that people play. It's just the same thing as guitar players walking into a music shop and picking up a guitar that doesn't look like something that they would be into, versus walking up and picking up something that immediately catches their eye. They're going to play different based on those two instruments. And so I feel the same way about recording and keeping things really interesting sounding to the artist while we're tracking, not trying to obviously doing things in post to assist, but trying to get some kind of vibe on the way in. I'm really big on that kind of thing. So yeah, this is the tune that we're going to track vocals on. So I'm going to open up the full session and play you the whole production with Bailey singing. I will say the drums in the final version did end up a little bit different. I'm using some inserts throughout the drums in the real mix that I didn't set up for this. So I've tried to recreate some of it with some things on my drum folder, but you'll see they're pretty much the same. So let's go to the other session. Here we go. Okay, so we're back today, and my assistant Tim and I have been working with Bailey all day recording vocals for the song Missionary Ridge. So I showed you some of the drum tracking techniques that we used on this tune and kind of how everything fits in. So for vocals with Bailey, we always do 3 stacks of her lead vocal, and then we double all the harmonies and whatnot. So we've been at it for a little while, and the song is pretty much there, but we still need like the 3rd and final lead vocal. So Bailey's out in the live room, and we're just gonna run this back so she can cut the vocal, and you guys can kind of hear how the whole thing fits together. Okay, Bailey, you ready?
Slip away,
Okay, so that was Beta Loan's Missionary Ridge that you just heard. And yeah, thanks for hanging out. And hopefully, I was able to show you guys some interesting techniques that maybe you haven't tried before. Hopefully, you go and try some of these things out and get some interesting sounds of your own. So, thank you again to AES for having me. This is Standard Electric Recorders, and yeah, keep on tracking.
All right. Wow. Damon, that was awesome. So thank you very much for taking the time to put that together. And thanks to Bailey. I know I believe she's still on here, watching as well. And, everyone should recognize she's a multi-instrumentalist. She did every one of those parts, which is pretty impressive in today's world to have that much talent. So great job all around. Thank you for doing that. So I have to ask you, Damon, what's the story on the bingo board?
Oh yeah. Actually, so the bingo board, my former partner and I, whenever we went to Canada to pick up the console, we rented just a big like sprinter, like a utility sprinter to bring it back in. So we literally got it back and got it into a storage unit, and we were on the way to return the sprinter to like the U-Haul kind of place, which funny enough is just up the street from the current studio. And we stopped by this place called Kudzu that's just up the street. It's like an antiques market, and we used to dig through records there and just kind of mess around in there. But we walked in and they had this bingo sign, and funny enough, with the exchange rate going into Canada, I didn't even think about that whenever I was buying the console. So I went to Canada to buy the console and ended up coming back home with a little bit more cash than I thought. Because of the exchange rate, and the price on the bingo board was like almost down to the dollar, like what we had left over. And so it was just like, still had my tape measure. So I measured it and it was like, this is like the exact size of the console. So let's just get it. And so at the old place, there wasn't a window at the old place that went out into the control room. So we put it up above the console on the wall, and it was kind of a nice, just like nice little feature of the control room. But here, I have been staring at it for 4 years, and so I was ready to, put it out in the live room this time. But yeah, it's kind of become something a lot of people take photos of it, and just kind of fun.
Yeah, add some character to the live room. So we got Matt, our tape man here, wants to know more about the tape machine you've got sitting in there.
Oh yeah, so in the chat, I have not been looking at the chat. Yeah, so that is that's back behind here. There's a Tascam. It's an MS16. I bought it from my buddy Ben Holst over at 800, but it was whenever Ben was closing down Southern Tracks. I was lucky enough before they closed to do a record over at Southern Tracks, and Ben was able to engineer, and I was able to just produce, and that was a really cool experience working with Ben. But yeah, when they were kind of closing down, he knew how much of a Tascam nut I am, and so he hit me up and asked me if I wanted to buy this thing. So yeah, so I got that. And then I guess it was probably in some of the other scenes in the video, but there's a Tascam ATR 60 half-inch 2-track over on the other side of the console. So I kind of think it's like the holy trinity of Tascam stuff. But everything is patched in, and I do tape, not too often. Everything's a tool. I find myself going there less and less these days, just because I have so much other stuff, and it's just kind of like a hassle to keep the machine up and running. But I still, every now and then I'll totally go to tape. Mostly, if I am doing that, then it's something where I'll track kind of normal and just like into Pro Tools, and then I'll actually just go back out to tape and just hit it really hard and try to get different sounds that way.
Great. So we've got some questions here on the vocal mic that Bailey was using, and the guitar signal chain. Maybe you could talk about both of those.
Sure. Yeah. So that mic, that's just an Aventone C12 clone. They're really affordable mics, but it's just a tube C12 clone. And I believe that's like I don't know. I think it's like the Taylor Swift mic. Like she recorded all the vocals on Red on that microphone is what I've read. I don't know if that's true, but yeah, I think the vocal chain on that was the C12, and I believe it's the BAE 312A, and I think it was the 1176. I have like a UA Classics back here. I think that was pretty much it for that. I try to use different mics for like background vocals too, especially since her vocals are tripled. It's kind of like with Bailey, everything we do is really there's like a method to everything that we've been working together for a long time, and we've kind of just figured out certain things about her music that just kind of like universally we just do. And so all of her vocals are tripled, and then the harmonies are doubled. The triples are like 30 center 30, and so I experiment a lot with the background vocals for a lot of her stuff. But pretty much the C12 is just like, especially the newer record. The tune you heard was off of the second LP that we're just finishing up, and we're about to start the third. She's super prolific, so we never stop working. The first one just finished. I think the release of the first one just kind of wrapped up. So
and she is on iTunes. I've pulled her up on iTunes. So
yeah, she's
on Spotify. Mm-hmm. So another question on the live room, when you're doing kind of a full band and you had some video there of a group in there playing, are you isolating the amps and how are you doing that, and how are you minimizing the bleed?
Yeah, so the sound lock over here that's just directly across from the control room, I'll throw amps in there a lot of times for live tracking. I also have like the booth back here, and everything is really easy to like, I can patch everything right here beside the console. Those like TC Electronics, what do they call it? The transport system, or teleport or something like that. They make those boxes that make it really easy to just convert, a guitar signal down into a mic level signal, or into line level, and then back out. So I can patch guitar anywhere or bass anywhere from here. So I'll put the amps either in the sound lock with some gobos in between them, or in the booth, and I'll just patch around so I can have people playing in the live room together, but have the amps all completely isolated and whatnot.
So we have another question on the mic. What was the cover on that? It was kind of like I think it was like a red, was that for pop filtering or other?
Oh, the little black thing?
It was black, yeah.
Totally, yeah. So those I actually got during COVID whenever I was trying to figure out how to open back up at the old space. I was like, I have only ever owned like one pop filter my whole life, and I never really thought about it until COVID. But I was like, oh, this is completely unsanitary. So I found just literally on Amazon, you can get like 100 for, I don't know, a couple bucks, but they're just little paper like covers. They're like karaoke mic covers. Like if you go to a karaoke bar, oftentimes they'll give you a little a mic with a little paper cover on it. So I just layer a couple of those on there, and honestly, I kind of like it totally takes care of the pop filter stuff, but like you can get the proximity like a lot closer, so you can do things that you kind of have a difficult time doing with some pop filters with them. So even post COVID, I think I might like to keep using those in some scenarios, and also metal pop filters. So
great. Well, does anyone else have any questions? You can type it in the chat, or just hit unmute and ask away. And if not, I know we are upon the hour, and we said this would be an hour program. So I guess, Damon, thanks a million for joining us this evening. This was fantastic. Thanks to Bailey Babylone for her performance and allowing us to hear her material. And again, if anyone has any ideas, we're trying to uncover these, hidden gems in Atlanta, and Standard Electric Recorder certainly is one of those. If anyone has any ideas, pass it on, and we'll get try to do a program on it. So all right, well, with that, then everyone have a good evening, and thanks for joining us.